Welcome to episode 61 of the CRM MVP podcast. Today I have Steve Mordue. Steve, welcome to the show.
Hey Gus, how's it going, man?
Good. Yes, I wanted to invite you because, I think until this point, I haven't really talked about the same topic twice. And as I mentioned, this is episode 61. We haven't really revisited anything, but changes on the licensing side keep on kind of being introduced. What it seems like every release cycle, we have two release cycles for Dynamics 365, and I feel that every release cycle, like when I feel that I'm getting a hold on the details behind licensing, because they don't make it easy. Obviously, every licensing guide is like 400 and something pages. Um, every time I feel like I'm getting a handle on this thing, boom, here we go. Let's introduce something. And this time around, they're not introducing like an improvement. Well, maybe it's an improvement, but they're not introducing a small adjustment on the way things used to be. They're redoing everything from scratch, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think one word you left out of all that was the word licensing, which is what you're talking about in that,
Yes.
that whole scenario. And licensing is, I mean, I think it's a perennial topic. It just never going to go away. With these folks, it's a continuous moving target as they try and figure out where they want this thing to end up, or not figure out where they want it to end up, but what steps they need to take to ultimately get where they want to end up. And a lot of that has to do with licensing. So it's going to constantly change.
But you were doing Salesforce before you started doing Dynamics 365. How often did Salesforce modify or change the licensing altogether?
Well, I mean, about as often as Microsoft did before James Phillips took over, right? I mean,
Interesting.
there wasn't a lot of changes there either, but I think James came into this organization and basically said, we're not winning.
Right.
We're not winning against Salesforce. We're not winning against anybody. We're like the 2% market share CRM, and I don't have any interest in being involved in that. So this whole thing's got to change into something else. Yeah,
Right.
he recruited these young kids. I don't want to call them kids. These young men, Charles and Ryan and Stephen and
Right.
you know
Yeah, these are
and,
not
and
industry veterans like the Bob Stutz of the world that have been doing CRM before computers even were around or whatever, right?
yeah, no,
These
these are
guys
guys.
are
These are guys that want to reinvent.
yeah,
They
these
want to
are highly
reinvent.
innovative, super smart guys. Of course, of
Yeah,
course.
and I think James has said, you know what, we need to reinvent because this is a losing horse and it's no fun. And and I think with that reinvention, I mean it's more than just a word. I mean they're literally reinventing everything, as you know, from what we saw just not that long ago, and it's coming at a fast and furious pace with lots of bumps along the way.
Yeah,
And every time they make some changes, man, I got to crack open that licensing because what they had doesn't make sense anymore.
yeah, that's true. And that is, I think, one of the biggest challenges I have, because at a glimpse, like when they introduce the latest changes, which are going into effect on October 1st, right, of 2019.
Yep, yep, exactly. Yep.
Right. So the new licensing changes are going in effect in October, which is very, very soon, right? Less than a month away. Based on what I saw, for customers that are out there that are leveraging, let's say, model driven applications, and they have users only using one application, which we talked about this in our episode about Dynamics 365 is kind of dead as we know it.
Mhm.
It's the end of Dynamics 365 as we know it. We talked about the fact that organizations should invest onto a model driven application that their users will have access to and focus on doing their work in just one application. Based on what I see, like just immediately right off the back, it seems like now those users will qualify to just pay $10 a month. Is that right?
Yeah, kind of funny how that lined up with our earlier conversation, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, I think that the $10 application or the $10 license is platform only. It is not a Dynamics 365 license. It does not have anything to do with Dynamics 365. So that is strictly applicable if you are on the platform only. But if you're on the platform only and you've built an application, and your users are only going to use that application, or even if you built multiple applications, but all users are only ever going to use one of those applications,
Right.
you're looking at a $10 license for that. Now, it's interesting because we were talking earlier today. There could be a potential consumption angle behind this, right? Because of storage changes that were made a while back that kind of moved that into kind of a consumption model. Although
That's right.
it could take quite a while, I think, for a model driven app user to hit that. But then we got the new issue around some of these API limits.
Yeah, I was
But
reading about that today, which is interesting.
yeah, but I'll tell you, I know that and we know from working with a team that when they put out limits, they don't just go grab some limit. They go look and see how are people using this stuff, and they look at here's what people are doing, and then they go to the top of that scale and they get rid of the outliers, the ones that are crazy, and they say, okay, here's the limit. And my understanding is these API limits were based on the 95 percentile. So there's going to be 5% of customers out, just like the storage. It was the same story with storage.
Right.
They came up with these limits based on the 95 percentile, but all you heard complaining about it was that 5%. And it's the same, it'll be the same thing with the API limits. But I think most people shouldn't have to worry about it. Their goal is not to worry about it. And if that's the case, and most people aren't going to have to worry about either storage or API limits, then yeah, $10, knock yourself out. You got yourself an app.
Which is awesome. Now, for those, I guess maybe this is a good time before we get too far in the episode to talk about the changes. So, not only the fact that the $10 per user per month, which is amazing for people that are paying 115 and using a model-driven application that hardly touches any of the primary app stuff. That's going to be an amazing change. But the other one is that they pretty much got rid of plan license on the Dynamics 365 side as well, right?
They did. I think the plan licenses were a stopgap and an idea at a time because, to be honest, it was kind of hard to explain to customers or figure out from customers in advance always what license they might need. And I think it was a challenge for Microsoft sellers too. The plan license kind of solved that for both Microsoft sellers and partners. Well, we'll just sell you the plan. You have everything, whether you use it or not. And
Well, and
and the
that came from the way licensing used to be
yep,
in Dynamics 365 or Dynamics CRM back in the day, where there was a unique license. It was a professional, I think it was called, and it was like $44 per user per month, and then that went to 65, and then they introduced like enterprise license and professional and basic and what was
yep.
the other one? Something like I don't
Business
remember the.
edition for a little
Yeah,
while.
yeah, yeah. They
Yeah,
they
had a
had they
bunch of
had
them.
different levels and whatever, but that license of you have access to everything that's being carried out from since CRM Online was launched essentially. So the plan one was that license. It was what you have access to everything except the FNO, pretty much.
Well, and FNO has a plan also. They're getting rid of the plan license on the FNO side as well. So
Yep,
all the plans are going away. And I think one of the challenges or problems with the plan was that was the big tool that field sales used. It was easy to sell, and they discounted the hell out of it. I mean, they were
definitely.
selling plan licenses for $35. For $115 license. I mean, why would you even try to sell them any other license but the plan? Just so, and I think the net result was that they were devaluing the product. This product was way too much innovation, way too much stuff in all of those products in that plan license for $35. And I think they were devaluing the product. And I think that's part of the strategy behind. We just got to get rid of this plan. And now, now you're going to buy your individual app you're using, which again is not going to affect 90% of the people out there because 90% of the plan users were using a single app.
That's right.
So
Even though they're paying for plan,
yeah,
but that's also because plans were the only ones that kind of had that leveling down of pricing, right? Where depending on how many users you had, you get automatic discount regardless of who you are. And on
well,
top of that, then they pile the other discounts, right? That
yeah,
reduce it down to, like you mentioned, a ridiculously low amount.
on an EA, a plan was cheaper than an individual app. It was
Absolutely.
strictly money. So if you only needed the sales app, it was cheaper to buy the plan. They were giving away the plan for less than the sales app, so it
Yeah.
made no
And that way
sense.
you don't have to worry about it, right?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
don't have to worry about missing something.
But that's also how you end up with 90% of the plan users on a single app because it's all they ever needed. And they bought the plan because it was cheaper than the single app. So that whole thing needed to be righted. And now with the single app licenses, with the add-on structure for your secondary apps or third apps, et cetera, I have a feeling they're going to be not as generous on the discounts. I think you're gonna go from a $35 enterprise plan license to a $60 enterprise sales license. It would be my prediction, because that's part of the goal here, is to write that ship, write that value. They've just poured too much into the product, not to.
Right. And what other things were again, if I'm thinking like a Dynamics 365 customer who maybe has a contract for whatever amount it is, they have a contract until, let's say, August of 2020 with this pricing. What else are we looking for in terms of the changes that are being introduced in October 1st that are going to affect organizations like that?
Well, I mean, I don't think they're going to affect anybody who's under a contract, right? I mean, none of that stuff takes place until your renewal. You're under
Right, but a lot
contract
of
with.
those contracts will end next year or
Yep.
whatever. So what are they looking at? What are all the changes they should be worried
You
about?
know, this is the kind of stuff you'll see, and even on some of the API discussions and things like that, where they don't want to. If something's going to create a big sticker shock, if somebody's coming, if they're launching these prices in October and somebody's coming off an EA in November, they don't want to have that customer all of a sudden just get buried, with some massive price, even if it's higher, lower, whatever, just a massive restructure. So, we see them do this grandfathering, right? Where you can, even
Right.
though we're going to give you
Keep it
some
for another
time,
year.
keep it
Yeah.
for another year, do something to give people some time to get off of it, because I mean, it's they're the one, they know they're the ones that are jerking it all around, and they can't jerk all the customers around with it.
Right. Now, the API limit stuff, does Salesforce do something similar to that? Do they have
Oh yeah,
limits?
yeah, it's almost the exact same program.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
All right. Because I was wondering, I was reading Juka's Bible on this stuff, of course, because he
yeah.
already wrote the most that you ever need to know about API limits. And he
Yeah,
mentioned
right.
that the out of the box contact, right? No customizations whatsoever. Just load the contact. Like if you get a trial from scratch, nothing done to it, is 17 calls to just open up a contact, 17 API calls.
And I will, I
Um,
will, I will counter that by saying that the Microsoft analytics on how on the API counts, that 95% of the current users are falling within the accounts that they're giving, regardless of how all that opening stuff. So I think
well, yeah,
I
but he
think we can
said,
get a little hung up on,
no,
I
no, no,
clicked
I
this
know that.
button and generated 45 calls or
Right,
something, but
right. No, I know that, but and he even said that if you're using the contact entity, for example, and you're not customizing it, meaning adding a bunch of calls to other systems and whatnot, then you would have to open a contact every 2 minutes, nonstop, 8 hours a day in order to go
to hit
through
it.
it.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
So for most, I agree with you. For most contacts that, or for most users, that
Never do
limit is
that.
not going to be there. And even if they hit it, there is no, like, you're not, it's not going to stop working. Like, maybe you get a bill or something. I don't know how that's going to work. Obviously, once it goes into effect, we'll see. There's a lot of limits that Microsoft has put in place, like, oh, you can only have 200 workflows or whatever, and they never,
Yep.
people go over those limits and they never pay for it. I
Yeah,
wonder
they
how it's going to
definitely,
be.
it is their strategy though to put limits on but don't enforce. But then
Yes,
start notifying, hey, you're over on storage, right? I mean, we never had a customer ever get shut off. Well, we've never had a customer get shut off for anything other than
that's
non-payment.
right.
So they just don't shut. I mean, you can't. You got mission critical apps out there. You don't know who's doing what. You go shut somebody's APIs off and find out it's some children's heart surgery center or some. You can't do that. I mean, you
Yikes.
just you can't do that. So I mean, they'll address it with warnings, notifications, just like they did with old um, license compliance, right? With the SAM
Yeah,
audits and stuff like that.
that's right. Yeah, awesome. So what else should people know about, especially new clients? So let's think about new clients now that are saying, you know what, I'm gonna hold off until October 2nd to sign up for this thing. What are they looking at?
I guess it depends on the path they're going to go. And I think that one of the things we're seeing now is a pretty clear separation of the Power Platform and Dynamics 365. And I wouldn't go so far as to say they're cutting 365 adrift, but clearly they're separating those two paths. The licensing is separate. This new $10 license and the $40 unlimited license for Power Apps has nothing to do with Dynamics. The team member license on Dynamics has nothing to do with Power Apps. There's no license sharing between those two models at all. So
Right.
for a new customer coming in, obviously that $10 license looks pretty darn appealing. Well, frankly, for a lot of existing customers, that just aren't using all of the features that they thought they might have or just never did. We're having a lot of folks now inquire about, hey, can we re-architect this down? Well, I mean, it's not as easy as it sounds because it's on the wrong CDS, but to get there, they're looking at potentially saving some money too. So
I
you
mean,
really
10 times if they're paying full price is
yeah,
10 times.
exactly. And you multiply that times 100 users. I mean,
Yeah.
that adds up to a lot of money pretty quick to justify re-architecting or migrating or something like that.
We're
But
talking to a customer right now. It's funny that you mentioned that we calculate that it would cost them between $300 and $400,000 to make a migration into a pure Power App Play to take advantage of this $10 license, and they will save like $90,000 a year in licensing.
yeah, yeah, and a lot of that, I mean, when you look at what would need to be built, um, that's what drives that cost. But the challenge right now, and then the deal breaker for some of these is ISVs that won't run on the platform. They need first party, and then you get that customer. It's like, oh well, we have this ISV, so we're stuck. But the next part of it is, you know what? We're still saving a lot of money. What would it take to rebuild what we're using of this ISV solution? So
Right.
these ISVs better keep their eye out because there is a huge lure for customers to look at that $10 license. If that ISV is not like, yeah, we got a version for that, they're going to find another option. I'm sorry, they don't need your ISV solution that
Or
much.
an out of the box, like there are some solutions out there from ISVs like auto numbering solutions that cost like almost nothing a year, but that because customers have been using it for the last 5 years or whatever, they don't want to invest on the fact that now we have auto numbering in Power Platform, right? We can
Yeah.
use the auto number fields to generate and do the same these applications do, but because they've had it for so long, it's like there's no need to change it. But guess what? If you're going to switch to the Power Platform to pay those $10, maybe it's time to say goodbye to some of these solutions and just use what out of the box is available, to you.
Yeah, I mean, especially I think, you get customers out there that have bought a complex third-party ISV solution with the biggest plans of what they were going to do, but years have gone by and actually they're using like even 2% of that. They're just really not using the whole thing. But that whole thing may be keeping them from moving down, and that ISV is sleeping at the wheel and doesn't have a version to follow with them. Those ISVs are going to lose that customer. There's no question about it. There's a point where the money is just stupid, and you have no choice but to act.
Definitely.
The bigger
So,
challenge, I'd say, where the challenge comes is you need to have a reasonable number of seats. If you got a 5 user deal out there, the cost of moving and all that stuff they'll have a tough time recovering that in their savings on 5 licenses. You get up into 100 licenses, you're talking about some money to do something with. You get up into 1,000 licenses, well, come on.
yikes.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
makes sense. No, but like the other thing that I noticed is that if because everything we have been talking about is if you need one app. So if you need to be on the sales app or if you need a model driven app or something like that is $10 a month. For Canvas apps, if you only need access to a Canvas app, is it still $10?
Yep. Yep. It's
Okay,
going to be
so they
going to
so
be the
they
same plan.
simplified it. That's right.
So, an app,
But
a $10
yeah,
app can include a model driven and a canvas and a portal. So
okay,
they define an app as those 3 components. Now, there's some separate portal costs on usage, but from a licensing standpoint, that $10 is more than just a model driven. It's a model driven, a canvas, and a portal. So it's a pretty robust offer.
now, if you have, let's say, because now we can embed Canvas apps into model-driven apps, if you embed multiple Canvas apps into a model-driven app, then are you potentially paying multiple apps
Nope,
to
nope.
X?
You can put it. You can embed as many as you want.
Okay,
That concept is strictly for a freestanding canvas and a freestanding model, but you can embed as many canvas apps in your model app as you want, and that doesn't impact that $10.
interesting.
Hmm.
Because
It's
that's how
just
you can.
it's really just a UI element at that point, right?
Right, right.
So
Yeah, because I can see how you could get around it and not having to pay double, but I can also see how if you're using, let's say, because I know there are some companies out there that would be using like the sales app plus a model driven app they created for another division, then you could potentially be paying double, right? Or at
well,
least on both sides.
If we're looking at strictly on the platform, it does. I mean, some of these license changes cause you to think about how you might architect these things a little bit, right?
Right.
So if I had a customer that came in and said, we want to build a sales app and we want to build a service app. Okay, there's two apps. Anybody going to be using both of them? Well, yeah, most people will use both. All right. Well, in that case, why don't we just put them both in a single app, right? We can combine all that into a single app. There's no reason
That's
to
right.
have them as two. Or, if it's a little more hybrid scenario, maybe we still put it in a single app and we just isolate it with security roles, right?
Exactly. That's what I
So
was going to say. You can always use
there's
security roles to not show the stuff that
yeah,
not everyone
yeah,
needs.
yeah. So there's ways, and I think we're going to find partners and ISVs and SIs trying to figure out, how many pounds can I shove in this 5 pound bag of functionality,
That's right.
where there's a will, there's a way, right? The water finds a way. And when there's a ten
Absolutely.
dollar license and that customer says, "Here, your responsibility is to architect our massive, complex deployment to fit on that $10 license," we'll find a way. And that $10, I mean, that's not some toy app. That's not some limited
No,
piece of
this is
junk. I mean,
full on
it's a
model
full
driven. This
it's a
is
full model driven. It's the same thing they
yeah.
built the full enterprise apps out of. If you got the budget and the time, you could replicate every single thing they built out there, which is another thing they eliminated was any question about that. And I knew you and I have gone back and forth on that. But any question on that was finally and clearly put to bed. Although I was, out there way before, not worrying about that one because I had intuited that was the way to interpret it,
Yeah.
and it
You
was
were on
kind
the
of
right side of guessing.
I was on the
That's
right
for
side
sure.
of guessing. Yeah, exactly.
That's good. So here's the thing. Last week I listen to this podcast every day. That essentially is from the New York Times, and it's like super short. It's like 15 minutes to 30 minutes every day, telling you like the things you need to know. It's always like a feature story plus a few more news. And
Hmm.
last week, one of the episodes was about Uber and how they continue to lose money, right? And everything that Uber has done was essentially to like get butts in seats. Like they just want people to ride Uber and make it something that is part of your life, right? And that's why they discount these essentially these rides so much is because they want people to ride Uber and they continue to lose money. It's something staggering, like $15 million a day Uber loses. It's ridiculous. And it was interesting because on that episode they were talking about how recently they started cutting in expenses. Like they fire, I think it was something like 1,000 out of their 2,000 people in the marketing department. I'm like, what do
Right.
you need 2,000 people in marketing to market Uber for?
Yeah,
Makes no
especially when you're
sense.
giving it away.
Yes, exactly. It just doesn't make any sense. The other thing they eliminated, which was hilarious, they eliminated $200,000 in balloons they buy every year. Like, how do you spend $200,000 in balloons? This is so ridiculous. And it was employee balloons, by the way. That wasn't on
So,
the
so everybody's birthday, they get two balloons.
$200,000 in employee balloons. It was so ridiculous. But anyway, I feel that by pricing this thing at $10 per app, essentially, or per user per app per month, however they call it these days, I feel that that is kind of the goal of Microsoft is to put butts in seats. It's kind of like the way I felt about Office 365 too, where I was like, how are they able, like in the early days of Office 365? Now it's up to like $20 per user per month or something like that. But when Office 365 came out, for those of us who were out there when that thing launched, it was like $6
Yep.
per user per month to get all of Office, even installed locally on your machine. Like you get the Office online and Office installed for just $6 per user per month. It was like the cheapest thing ever, and that's why millions of users essentially were transferred from on-prem, Exchange on-prem, SharePoint on-prem, etc., to Office 365. Do you think that that's kind of what's happening here? Microsoft making a move to bring a lot of people that maybe are using your typical Visual Studio whatever to create these custom apps that now can be created easily as a canvas or a model driven application or perhaps a portal, and just bring them in. Like let's eat out at that 20 something percent whatever Salesforce has in the market share. Let's eat at that, even though it's costing us money. Or will Microsoft actually make money out of selling $10 licenses per user per app per month?
They set a limit on the storage. They set a limit on the APIs, which are their cost drivers, right? That's their cogs. So they got this $10 license that is somewhat protected. The challenge is going to be volume. They basically need to sell 10 of those for every sales license they sold to kind of break even. And I think that the bet here is that at $10, that so widely opens up the market, uh, like it never has before, that they're going to easily eclipse, 10 times the number of licenses they sold for Dynamics. And they're going to eclipse that fairly quickly. And this is all circling back to this thing. We want to be a platform company, right? I mean, this is a
Right.
platform play. Dynamics 365 is not a platform play. That's an app play, but this is a platform play. So I think when it comes to platform, they look at it differently. They look at it more as scale. It's a scale motion. It's completely different motion than Dynamics 365. This is a scale motion, and you want to get scale. Well, $10 will help you get scale.
Definitely. Yeah, I just obviously these guys are again are super smart. They know what they're doing, and hopefully they're right in terms of how do we bring a lot of people in 10 times more than we used to bring with sales and start eating at that market share. Do you think that we will see kind of an answer from other companies like Salesforce or other organizations out there maybe offering licenses for the platform rather than focusing so much on their apps?
I don't think it's going to come from Salesforce, but there's already a market out there of low code, no coders that are coming up that side. There's several platforms out there that are well established in enterprise organizations that are kind of been in that space for a while. Microsoft's kind of in a unique spot, and they're landing kind of in between. And I think what some of the things they're doing are a little too far. I can't see Salesforce trying to do the same kind of a platform play the same way, and they don't have a broad enough set of assets. Yet these low code guys don't have enough depth of assets. I mean, Microsoft just it. What I think the good thing we're seeing is they're actually finally taking advantage of all of these things that while they compete with a company with every one of them, there's no one company that can compete with them with all of them. And they're pulling them all together now into this single offering. We're looking at Azure and Office and Power Platform. Nobody has that. Nobody can compete with it. They can only compete with parts of it. And I think it's about time that they actually leverage their strength. Maybe it's part of this whole One Microsoft initiative to get everybody on the same page and realize, hey, we're stronger together.
Definitely. And you mentioned that, when it came to the plan license for Dynamics 365 and the fact that because they could discount the bejesus out of that, it was easier to sell that rather than selling app licenses. Do you think that, or maybe have you heard kind of any changes on the sales side of Microsoft? Because for the most part, customers will reach out to Microsoft and say, hey, can you talk to me about CRM, about Dynamics 365, or about the platform or whatever? They're the ones fielding all these leads. Are the salespeople incentivized now to sell the platform? Have you heard anything about that?
Oh yeah, they're definitely incentivized to sell the platform. I don't know how all those numbers shake out, but I know in talking to some of the sellers that there's a push for platform. And I don't know if that means they're lowering what they were going to do on the first party, but they're definitely not wanting the sellers out there trying to sell the most expensive license that they have all the time. They want to drive that platform. I'd say, and the other huge story really is this ISV push. I mean, they are really thinking now with a platform model, Canvas, AI Builder, Power BI, Flow. I mean, that's a platform to build anything with. And ISVs, should be looking at that. And I'm not talking about ISVs doing stuff what I'm doing. I'm talking about stuff doing ISVs doing the most complicated stuff out there. I mean, the tool set's there, and it's scalable. And I think we're going to see lots more noise. Well, we already are, but it's going to continue on that ISV front.
Definitely. And the other thing that I was just thinking about is for ISVs out there that have their solutions, that have invested years and all of that, and even for Microsoft, like I wonder what are some of the things that we miss by ignoring essentially the Dynamics 365 applications and going for this attractive model driven application at $10 per user per month? Like, what are the things that we miss? Like, do we miss the Outlook client? Like, what are the things like relationship insights? I'm pretty sure we're gonna miss, but what are the things out there? Like, for example, in terms of, let's say, Dynamics marketing, does that depend on any of the primary applications where someone should be aware of it before they jump ship really quick to say, okay, let's transfer everything to model driven apps so we can start paying $10 a month in a couple weeks? What are the things that we should warn people and say, look, if you're trying to make a transition, here are the things that are probably not going to work very well?
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting because as this thing started, and we were in there early on with the rapid start, and it was a frustrating experience for us because so much stuff was missing. And the model driven hadn't reached parity, and there were a lot of components that were missing that customers were looking for, and but when you stand back 50 feet and look at this thing and watch what's happened in the last several months, I mean. Um, so we have Outlook app, right? The same Outlook app, right? The new Outlook app for business applications is going to be an app source download, and that's going to end up being for both sides of the platform. It's the same damn app. So
Yeah.
the Outlook app problem is gone. There's a parity on Outlook app. They released Power Portals, which is the portal that runs on the platform without first party. When you look at the accelerators that they're building, with the most recent one they just launched for the banking industry, they actually have the core accelerator that runs on CDS without any first party. Then they have some additional solutions you can install that engage with a first party that have more example apps, but the CDM is the same. So if you want to build ISV, and now there's a motion to go back to the rest of those accelerator apps and create that same thing. So everything's going to CDS. Some of the things like relationship insights, that's a particular manifestation of an Azure thing that we put out there. But we've got AI Builder, and we certainly have Azure, and we're going to see, of course, the Power Component framework works across both. I think any of these sorts of things that have been real blockers before, we're just seeing those walls kind of come down, and to me, standing back looking at it, it seems kind of apparent their long-term strategy is Power Platform. I mean, that's the long-term strategy.
Absolutely. And for people listening to this, of course, you and I are Microsoft MVPs. We don't work for Microsoft, so we're not here to just promote Microsoft and all of that. I think that anyone out there listening is sort of asking, okay, hold on one second. So I was paying 115, then I invested a bunch of money
Hmm.
to make this application, the sales application, let's just say,
Hmm.
do whatever my company needs it to do. So it's completely custom. So you're telling me that if I rebuild that from scratch, into my own separate application, I get to pay $10 per user per month from 115 if I had, let's say, 50 users. Like, where's the catch?
I mean, I think the catch is you're probably going to spend as much to re-architect and put that down on the license as you spent to build it in the first place. I mean, it's not. There's no button you can just push and say, "Hey, make this work on this $10 app." So there's an investment that needs to be made, just like there was when you built it. Depending on what you've done, a lot of it's so specific to how they're using the applications is the challenge. What they're doing. I mean, of the first party apps, are you making heavy use of, say, the product catalog or things like that? They're going to require a lot of custom development to rebuild, or or not. If you're making heavy use of a lot of ISV solutions that either are going to cost a lot to rebuild, there's not an alternative that runs on CDS, that ISV is sleeping at the wheel. Then you got to rethink, okay, how do we solve what we're doing with that solution? So it definitely is not as cut and dried as, hey, there's a $10 license you can go, flip it to, and every one of those situations is going to be unique. But it's
Right.
a completely valid scenario. I mean, there's absolutely customers out there that bought the sales app. Whatever customizations that they made, I mean, that's all portable, right? Push that out to a solution, bring it over to CDS. You may got to go tweak it to work with some custom entities that you create instead of the out of the box. It's just work.
Right.
The ISV is a challenge, but if they haven't got into lots of crazy stuff, I mean, I think they need to do the math on it because and again, especially if they've got a reasonable number of users, because now you're talking about a reasonable amount of money. If you got
Definitely.
five, if you're listening to this and you got 5 users, just stay where you are.
Yeah.
You'll
Take
never
yeah.
recover that. But
Be happy.
be happy. Yeah, exactly. It's be sorry you didn't start here, but you know what? It's not costing you that damn much money. But when you get
Right.
up into 100 users, you should start looking at this. You're into 1,000 users. Yeah, you have to look at it. You have to.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I would say so if we had to give people, let's say if customers were listening to this and they wanted like a next step, like, okay, so this sounds awesome. What should be the next step? Would you recommend that maybe they should reach out to a partner? Maybe their partner, maybe another partner that understands this licensing and kind of the difference between the Power Platform and Dynamics 365, and maybe go through like an audit and understand really what it would take to make that transition. Do you think that's a good next step, or what would you say will
I
be?
know it is because we
Okay.
launched two consulting services offers on AppSource. One is a briefing on moving from spreadsheets to Power Apps, and the other is an assessment on moving from first party to Power Apps. And those things, phone rings off the hook. So
Absolutely.
there's absolutely interest out there in that kind of a service for customers or any partners that are listening. There's definitely a strong level of interest from customers in those things. I think the bigger challenge we have today, part of what you're trying to solve with an episode like this and similar ones that are going on almost every day now in this channel, is getting everybody up to speed on understanding what it is, because customers they're going to be looking for answers, and you better have them. And you need to be paying attention to shows like this one and other ones, and listen to people that are paying attention to that stuff for you, um, or you're going to have a problem.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I'm talking to like as soon as the news came out and they were finally public, I had some prospects that are either preparing to launch in Q4 of 2019 or maybe at the beginning of 2020 that I was like, okay, now wait, it's only $10, but wait, there's more. Like I feel like I'm trying to sell in an informational
Yeah,
because of
right.
the we've been so used to like this prices, right? The 100 and something or 90 something or whatever it is, and especially for the one with LinkedIn Sales Navigator, if you're trying to use that, it's like 145. So, and then out of all of a sudden, I can come and be like, but wait, like, we can do it for $10 per user per month, and it feels kind of interesting to
It
do
it
that.
is a new sales process, right? We're all used to
Yeah,
selling something expensive and justifying a cost of something expensive, and none of us really knows how to sell something that on its face is cheap. It's just we don't have that good muscle in place. When you mentioned LinkedIn, yeah, I'll give you another one prediction of one of our from our last prediction show. I think
yeah,
eventually we're going to see a version of LinkedIn Navigator that will work on CDS. It doesn't require the first party app, and
nice.
that'll be completely dependent on the success of the platform. If that thing blows up, and to be honest, I mean, Charles said that thing is taken off like SharePoint. He's really talking, I think, more about the citizen developer Canvas side. But when that model side takes off, which is going to be partner and ISV driven,
Yep.
it won't be citizen. It's going to be partner and ISV. When that thing takes off and catches fire, then all of a sudden every ISV who's sleeping on the wheel is going to wake up, and they're going to be looking at things like LinkedIn. Hey, customers are moving from here to there at a pretty rapid clip. We better be over there. Yeah, I think that'll come eventually too. I mean, nobody said anything about that to me. You mentioned it, and
Yeah,
and
yeah. If
I,
we knew, we couldn't
yeah,
talk about it. So
yeah, right,
that's what
exactly.
I typically say on this episode. So it's like if I actually knew, I couldn't tell you. So
Yeah,
if I'm telling you, it's just speculation,
it's
right?
just
We're
made
just
up stuff,
exactly.
or
The other
public,
thing,
or public.
yeah, definitely, or public. The other thing that is interesting that you mentioned is that model-driven applications will be partner-driven or ISB-driven, and I agree with that. I think that and I see it sometimes. Like sometimes I work with customers, and as you know, and you probably do, you guys do this as well. We like our customers to be involved and own their solution, right? That
Yeah,
we implement for them.
you
So
hope.
one thing that you notice is that in a lot of cases, some customers want to be yeah, they want to play solution architect in the sense that, okay, now that I own it, phase two or extra work, like I'm going to actually do myself. And one of the things that I notice is that in a lot of cases, because they don't have that level of experience, because even if they've been working with Dynamics for 5 years or whatever it is, they've only worked in one implementation, right? It's just their
Yeah,
own implementation. One of the things that they struggle with is really understanding the fact that there are 5, 10 ways to do something. And if even if you accomplish something, checking the box that, yeah, now we can track whatever type of record, it doesn't mean that it's going to be successful. So that's why I kind of agree with you on the whole idea that when it comes to these more complex applications, these model driven applications, I think that companies should continue to work with a partner that is capable of understanding all those different ways of doing it and coming up with the best way to do it.
Well, and model ends up being the foundation then for all of those other things to connect to, right? I mean, Flow, Power Apps, Power
Power
BI,
BI, yep,
all of these things kind of they all sit on top of that common data service, which more commonly is under model, and so all that stuff's complicated. For citizens to pop open Flow and create a flow that, oh, when I get an email, so send this thing over into a SharePoint library, that's perfect citizen stuff. Pop open Canvas, play around with that PowerPoint looking thing and make some app. Yeah, they can solve a lot of small problems with that, but you can't solve big problems with those tools. You really can only solve big problems, I think, starting from the data, and that's the model driven side,
yep.
is to solve big problems. So a lot of it has to do with what kind of problems they're going to need to solve, but definitely for big problems, which is what we all really want to solve for. I think you got to start at model.
All right. In your opinion, and this, as we try to wrap up the show, in your opinion, what are the chances that we're going to have another one of these episodes in like May or maybe October of next year or whatever? What are the chances that licensing will be overhauled yet again in 2020?
100%. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. I mean, this is a moving target. They are, they're adjusting the levers to figure out what works. They've already made changes, before they even announced stuff they told us about internally, and then what was ultimately released.
That's
And
right.
you don't know what's going to happen until it hits the market. Now, a Microsoft guy told me once a long time ago in a private conversation about pricing. He says, we can always lower the price later, but we can't raise it. Um, and I think that's part of the strategy. You come out, so which is interesting when you think about that $10, because if that's kind of the philosophy that we can't launch a price and then turn around a month later and say, oh, we screwed up, we need to double it.
It's actually 30.
Yeah, you can't do that. But you could always go down. Nobody's ever going to complain if you come back a month later and say, hey, you guys didn't really uptick on this like we thought, so we're lowering the price. That's an easy conversation.
Right.
Um, but here they're launching this $10 with that philosophy. So I don't think there's a scenario where they pop up their head, in 3 months and say, "Hey, we screwed up. It should be 20."
Yeah.
If anything, we'll see these prices. I think the prices, if anything, they go down in response to market to try and drive demand. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're gonna go up eventually. They all do, right? Everything always goes up in cost eventually. But I think the first thing to do is hit the market here. Let's see how they bite. Worst case, we can dip it a little, and then it'll level out, and then they'll have their regular, increases in cost, just like everybody does for everything else you buy.
Right, right, right. And I think that some of those changes that you said, 100% are going to happen could be driven by the same thing that is driving changes over the last few years, which is people abusing the system or, taking advantage of kind of the changes that Microsoft introduces. And Microsoft obviously changes, I guess, to counterattack those abuses. I would say, I don't know if I would call it abuses, but in a
Right.
lot of cases, like the changes with storage, the changes
Yeah.
with API limits, is because companies out there are taking advantage of it.
Or unintended consequences. I mean, you put something together, you think you got every angle figured out, you launch it, and then suddenly you find this great big hole in the back of it, hemorrhaging that you didn't even think about before. Some of these things just don't present until you've launched and you're out there, and users start kind of figuring out. You never know what the heck the user is going to do, right? I mean,
Right.
especially if they're inclined to try and find a leak in the boat, they'll find it. But even when they're not, they'll spring some, and that's when they got to come back and make some adjustments. We talked before. I guess it was the lotto company that was like 2 users or something, was blowing up all the API calls and storage and everything else, running a
That's right.
lotto system. So yeah, clearly there's an outlier that they hadn't calculated for in their licensing that required. Okay, we need to make a change, and it's always the outliers, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they continually talk about 95% of users won't see a change. Well, it's that 5% is the one that are killing them, right?
Yeah.
The 5% could be driving half the total cost of the whole thing. You know,
How will the market respond to kind of this whole push for Power Platform? Will they see it as a different product? Like when you look at the quadrants or whatever, like they always
Mhm.
have it like for CRM, it's like Salesforce all the way to the top right, and then
Yeah.
Microsoft Dynamics 365 will be in there. Will we see Power Platform or Power Apps on that quadrant, or will the seats and kind of activity that the Power Platform generates count as part of the dynamics when it comes to the business, when it comes to the market?
I think that there'll probably end up being another category, and I think Power Platform will probably is trying to create another category. They really, I don't get the sense that we're focused on Salesforce myopically like we used to be. Now it's, you know what,
Right.
let's make use of our assets and let's go grow our customers. Don't worry about anything else is doing. And I think the biggest challenge we have right now with the end customers out there is just education. They never heard of Power Platform. We're trying to make noise. Microsoft's making noise. I mean, we still have customers out there call it CRM, right? We haven't called it CRM in years. They're really, they're doing their business, right? They're not in our business. So well, we have so much of our channel that's behind. Imagine how far behind those customers are. So it's a massive education process right now. Every sales call is an education process. I think you should be looking at Power Apps on the platform. What is that? You're going to ground zero in every phone call, and it's going to be that way for a while. They may have
Yeah.
heard of Dynamics 365, but they heard of it like it was launched yesterday. I mean, they're really behind the curve. So lots of education. Be prepared for that. Whenever there's any big massive change like this, just lots of education. So we're in that mode right now. So once we get past that, it's part of that whole adoption curve, right? We're in the beginning of that adoption curve. I'm sure there's people at Microsoft that would like to say we're well up the hill, but I mean, in my phone calls with customers, we're still at the beginning of that. You know.
Yeah, they're still looking for Microsoft CRM. All right, Steve. Well, thank you so much for giving us a lot more clarity on these changes that are happening with licensing, and of course, I'm sure you'll be in the future to talk about more changes that are happening with licensing in 2020. But if people have more questions and they want to kind of reach out to you and maybe thank you for your thoughts on this episode, or maybe have questions about ForceWorks or you, what's the best way to reach to you or reach you out?
Sh- Yeah, sure. They can find me at on LinkedIn, Steve Mordue, or search Twitter, Steve Mordue. Mark Smith and I do a weekly live YouTube show that we're having some fun with uh,
Yeah.
on YouTube at NZ365 Guy, and look for
Why do
Power
you
Up
say
Podcast.
NZ? Like,
I know,
what?
because
Hold
he
on, hold
because
on.
he does. I
Because
know
that's
you
what he
you
does.
busted his chops about that too, but
Yeah, because
that's
I
what they.
asked him, it's like it's not JZ, it's JZ, right? So everyone should say
No,
NZ365.
no, down in New Zealand, he's known as JZ.
I bet. Exactly. All right, and then stevemordue.com, right?
SteveMordue.com. Yep, for the blog.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, Steve, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for tuning in to episode 61 of the CRM MVP podcast. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at CRM MVP podcast, and all of our episodes are at crmmvppodcast.com.